In this video, we're going to explore some fascinating ghost towns south of Regina, Saskatchewan. Only places that have buildings that you can photograph or explore will be in this video. Most of them are easy to access, but the roads may not be drivable during winter. So let's begin. Bayard, Saskatchewan is the smallest town on this trip. It's pretty much just one main road into town. It's been abandoned for decades. There is one family who still lives here, but it's got this old gas station with a gas pump, and along Main Street there's a few other abandoned buildings, including some houses. Not much has changed here over the last 18 years since I visited it for the first time. The family who lives here owns all these properties, and they've put up a bunch of no trespassing signs. But everything can be viewed right from the street. And they got a really friendly dog who lives here. Next up is Galilee, Saskatchewan. The buildings that are still available are right along the highway. The rest of the town is actually about a kilometer further to the east. There was once a school here and it closed in 1956. And the grain elevator's been gone for about 60 years. I'm not sure how long this house and gas station have been abandoned for, but I'm going to assume it's been about 50 years. The building is collapsing. I'm actually surprised it's lasted this long. A lot of people like to use this building for night photography. Next up is Kayville, Saskatchewan. This is one of my favorite ghost towns in the whole province. It's got this really neat church inside that somebody's still caring for. And they saved the old bell. At one point this town had 100 residents. Now there's about 10 left. When I first visited here 18 years ago, the hotel and restaurant were still open and there was a bank. Now the hotel's a private residence and the bank is gone. Here's the old co-op store. In 2009, I actually spent the night in this town. We were doing a photography expedition and shooting some of these buildings at night. Main Street is very short, but it's got a handful of abandoned buildings. The community center was built only in 1984. At one point, somebody was renovating this church about 10 years ago. I think they stopped working on it. The residential area, all the roads are pretty much grown over with grass and weeds. And there's still some old abandoned houses here. Next up is Crane Valley, Saskatchewan. Like pretty much all the ghost towns in this video, this town's demise began when the railroads were abandoned. And most of those abandonments happened in the 70s and sometimes right up to the 90s. Main Street pretty much has no buildings on it, and there are a couple residences here. The population of this town is a fraction of what it used to be just a few decades ago. And walking down Main Street and seeing all the buildings gone makes it kind of eerie. And in 2007, the school closed. And this is the old community hall at the baseball diamonds. And right across the street is the grain elevator. The grain elevator is still in operation. There were people working here while I was visiting. My all-time favorite ghost town was Dummer, Saskatchewan. I was so excited to come back, but when I got here, I noticed that it had recently been completely cleaned out. There's still the road in the town, and there are still a couple of buildings, but it was so depressing seeing it like this that I just kept going. The next spot is Horizon, Saskatchewan. It's one of the more popular ghost towns in Saskatchewan, and it's one of the few towns that are still along a main railroad line. This is the old gas station. It's been closed for decades, and I think the service attendant used to live in this house. There's a passenger rail service in Ogama, Saskatchewan, and it actually brings the passengers to Horizon during the summer. At one point, they were trying to save these grain elevators. I'm not sure if they're able to, but this is one of the few grain elevators with the original Saskatchewan Wheat Pool logo on it. These roads are pretty much overgrown with grass and weeds now, and you can still make out the old sidewalk. I was told that a tornado had hit this town in about 1949. It clearly didn't do too much damage. This church was in use until about 1991. They've recently renovated it. The next town is Khedive, Saskatchewan. This used to be a really cool ghost town about 18 years ago, but now some residents have moved back in and most of the buildings are gone. But coming here for the school alone is worth it. I think somebody still uses it for maybe some community activities, but I love this style of brick building they used to have all over Saskatchewan. And there's the old outhouse. And you can also find this vintage old playground. I think the kids around here still use it. Now we're going to visit Brooking, Saskatchewan. I love the area that this town is located in. It's really pretty. Even though the train has not operated here in 30 years, the rail line still exists. But this grain elevator's pretty much been abandoned since the 60s. That logo is from a movie they filmed in the area about year 2000. Someone once told me a person who survived the Titanic ended up living in this town. But once all the businesses closed down in the 60s, including the post office and the store and the grain elevators, this town pretty much met its demise. Nobody lives here now. And pretty much the entirety of the former town site is now a farmer's field. There's still some buildings back there, but I didn't get permission to walk out here and shoot them today. I'll try that next time. The next town is Bromhead, Saskatchewan. When I first visited this town in 2005, I was fascinated as Main Street just looked right out of an old country western movie. Even had the old theater back then. But most of the buildings are still here. I'm not sure what business this used to be. But that was obviously an auto service center. But it's this old gas station that's just absolutely amazing. It's still here. These two old gas pumps. And it looks like this place has been abandoned probably since the 70s. I read in a book once that back in the day, some American bank robbers showed up in this town and blew up the safe at the bank. That would have been right here along Main Street as well. They cut the telephone lines and all the residents came out to see what was going on. I think this church is still in service. Last time I was in town, there was 2 grain elevators. Now there's only 1. This looks like it's to be a very old federal grain elevator. And when you're driving down the residential areas, you're going to see many abandoned homes that haven't been lived in for decades. It does look like some new houses have been built, so maybe people are moving back to Bromhead. Next up is Froude, Saskatchewan. I'm pretty sure I pronounced that wrong. I was here 15 years ago and one of the residents told me the name, but I can't remember how to pronounce it. At one point, this town had 200 residents. Now there's only one family who still lives here. And I think that family may own most of these buildings. I'm not sure if it's completely abandoned. The train service left here a long time ago, and I'm pretty sure this building is probably a railroad house of some sort. I think the businesses and post office closed in this town in the late 1960s. The most fascinating building in this whole town is this old church. I've been shooting this for about 18 years. In fact, there's a picture of it in my book, Forgotten Saskatchewan. It was locked, but it looks like someone came along and kicked the door in. That's technically trespassing. I'm not going in there because they clearly don't want people there. But isn't that gorgeous? It's too bad that in its current state, it's not going to last much longer. But I really hope you guys have a lot of fun when you're visiting these places. Walking down Main Street and it's all overgrown. And you can still see some houses nestled in the woods. To go from 200 residents down to pretty much none in just the course of a few decades is absolutely amazing. This one isn't really a ghost town. It's a really neat abandoned church in the middle of nowhere, just north of Francis, Saskatchewan. I'll put the GPS coordinates in the description below. About 7 years ago, they had to lock up the place and put cages around all the windows because people were doing a lot of vandalism in here. I don't think it's going to last much longer as this foundation is definitely leaning. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for joining me.